Today we're going to be discussing how advertising is an important part of a high school journalism program and how to go about getting ready to go sell ads. And the topic is called The Business of High School Journalism, Advertising Sales. First thing that you have to think about when you are getting ready to put out a high school newspaper or high school yearbook is how you're going to pay for the printing costs and the other expenses that you're going to incur in the course of a year. And advertising sales is one way and the most important way of supporting those costs. The professional publication's actual size is determined by how much advertising is sold. A professional newspaper likes to have around 60% of its content is advertising in order to stay in the black. And that advertising deadline comes long before the news deadline, and those pages are presented to the news staff with the advertising already placed. It's kind of a misconception that the news comes first and the advertising is an afterthought. When the pages get to the newsroom, they have about a 40% hole to fill, and the rest of it is advertising. And yearbook is a little bit different in that we set aside pages for advertising, and we set our advertising goals prior to publication so that we can pay for all of the costs that we incur. The most important thing you have to have before you even start talking about selling your advertising is having some kind of a policy in place to help address as many of the problems as you can anticipate ahead of time as possible. This is a living document. Sometimes you have to make changes to it as you go along, but it has a written statement of specifically what kinds of ads are acceptable and what kind of ads are not acceptable. This is where local standards come into play. Depending on where your school is located, some ads may or may not be allowed. State law will dictate some of the kinds of ads that you can include. Some things to remember when you're writing this policy: are you going to advertise restaurants that serve alcohol? Since your audience is high school students and not of the age to drink, that could be an issue. In some states, kids under the age of 21 are not even allowed in those buildings, let alone purchase anything. Unplanned pregnancies organizations sometimes can cause a problem in a community. Are you going to allow pro-abortion organizations to advertise in your publication? Are you going to allow pro-life organizations to advertise? And if you allow one, do you have to allow the other? That should be stated in your policy. Sometimes divorce counseling becomes a problem for some kids, and those kinds of organizations like to advertise in publications that are dealing with young people. That might be an issue for you to consider. Another one has come to the forefront lately in some schools is organizations that have non-traditional sexual orientation or lifestyle kinds of proponents. Are they going to advertise in your newspaper or yearbook? And products that are illegal to kids that are under the age of 18. In some states, seniors are 18 or 19 years old, and so they would be considered a proper audience for some of those products. But the majority of your staff or your audience is going to be under the age of 18. I'm thinking along the lines of things like tobacco and tattoo parlors. Those are generally unavailable to kids under the age of 18 without parental consent, so you have to determine whether or not you're going to allow them to advertise in your publication. If your policy is clearly stated, you can easily say to an advertiser that is not allowed to advertise in your publication, our policy states we are not going to accept these kinds of ads. Today there was some discussion with some other journalism teachers about political ads, that there are people running for school board and they want to advertise in the high school newspaper so they can get those voters that are age 18. So if you have a policy stating that yes, we're going to accept those kinds of ads, or no, I'm not going to accept those kinds of ads, you can show the prospective advertiser we have a policy that says we can't do that. Another important part of the policy making process is to make sure that you include not only you as a staff member, but the advisor and the administration, school board, superintendents. They all need to be on board and understand what the advertising policy states. And as a high school staff, there might be some things you hadn't thought of, and the school lawyer might be able to help you out with some of the wording and some of the things you might want to include. Another thing that can be included in your advertising policy, as well as the kinds of things you're going to accept, are when are your deadlines. If you're a weekly publication, you're going to have those ads placed before the news gets placed. If you are a yearbook, there comes a point in time when the printing plant says this is the deadline for certain things, and you have to make sure that your advertisers know exactly what those deadlines are. And your sales staff needs to know exactly when those deadlines are. I've had students come to me after the yearbook's done and say, gee, I'd like to have my senior ad in the newspaper or the yearbook, and it's too late. We've already finished that portion. Another thing to state in your policy is how payments are going to be made. Can you accept cash? Can you accept a check? Most schools can't take credit cards, but a lot of companies are dealing more with plastic every day. So you'll have to have a statement in there about how you can accept payment, how far in advance you need payment. Are you going to work on a 30-day kind of situation where once the ad is placed, you've got 30 days to pay it, or 60 days to pay it, or 90 days to pay it? Those are all things that accounting staffs at schools can help you with. Your bookkeeper can help you with those kinds of things, and how you're going to bill them. Do you want your cash up front? Do you want to bill them after the ad has run? And whether or not you're going to include tear sheets. A tear sheet is an actual copy of the newspaper with the ad torn out of it and returned to the advertiser, proof that their ad has run. And then it accompanies a bill, and hopefully you get paid promptly. Placement of ads is kind of important. If you are in the professional world, there are different people who will pay a little extra money to be assured that their ad runs in a specific place. If you are a sporting goods store, you might not want to have your ad run in the news section. You might want it to run in the sports section, and you're willing to pay a little extra to have that done. Also, in your advertising policy, you need to have some prices set. Most of the time, the yearbook company, it's pretty easy to set advertising prices because they can tell you how much it costs to produce each page of your book. If it costs $100 to produce a page of your book, then your advertising should, for a full-page ad, should reflect that. It should be more than $100 so that you can reap profit from that and also take care of your costs that you're going to incur by including that. Newspaper, you might want to look at what other schools in your immediate area are charging for the column inch. Your local newspaper might be able to tell you how much they're charging. And then you're going to be looking at your circulation. If you're a small high school newspaper, your circulation is relatively small. Your prices should reflect that. They should be cheaper than the local big city newspaper. If you're going to design ads for your advertiser, you might want to tack on a design fee. That way you can get paid a little extra for doing their work. But many companies these days are very media savvy, and they probably have an ad all ready to go, and they won't be wanting to pay a design fee because they've already paid an advertising agency for that. But if you're going to do the work for them, you might want to tack on a little bit of money. Also, in your advertising fees or advertising policy, you're going to want to talk about how can you accept that advertising. Do you want camera-ready copy? Can you accept a digital image? What kind of digital image can you accept? I have spoken with some advertisers that have been able to give it to me in whatever format I want, TIFFs and JPEGs and EPS files and PDF files, and you might want to state that in your advertising policy what your preferred file format is. For most yearbooks, it's going to be a TIFF file, but we can work with just about anything. Budgeting. You should know how much advertising you need to sell in order to run your publication. Working with a yearbook representative, they can help you establish a budget for how much it's going to cost for your book, how much it's going to cost for all the extras. The more cover applications that you have, the more color you have, the cost of your book continues to go up. The size of the book, whether it's a 8.5 by 11 or a 9 by 12, the number of pages, all of those choices that you make as a yearbook staff add to the cost of the yearbook, and your yearbook rep is the one that has those price sheets. So they can help you establish all of those yearbook costs. Your printing plant can also help you establish your costs for printing a newspaper. They'll tell you how much it costs to run a certain number of copies, how many pages, and you can look at that and say, if it's going to cost me $500 to print my newspaper once a month, then you're going to have to figure out where that $500 is coming from. A good portion of that's going to have to be made up in advertising. Some additional costs that most high school staffs don't think about, however. When you think about the printing costs, we know we've got to pay the plant, we know we've got to send our money off to wherever the yearbook is being printed, but there are other costs that you don't think about. If you are still using film, if you are working with chemicals, if you don't process your own color but have to go to Walmart and have that done, you have to figure out what those costs are going to be. It costs money to have judges look at your book, and somewhere around between $50 and $200 to have a yearbook critiqued by a national organization. If you want to have that done, that $200 is going to have to come from your budget, and that means you might have to sell a couple of extra pages of ads. Some schools require the journalism staff to come up with their own printer paper and toner for all those pages that are sent to the plant on Xerox copies. So you might have to include those costs. And of course, the computers and the software that you're using, sometimes that's supported by the school as an educational cost. Sometimes that's something that the staff has to decide, yes, we want to upgrade, it's going to cost us X amount of dollars, we need to sell extra ads to do that. So those are some of the additional costs. Place where you can make money. Besides selling ads, you can sell books. The more books you sell, the cheaper it costs to print them. And if you are a small school with a small run, your book is going to be just as costly as a book that's being run for a large number of students from a large school, because the small run is more expensive to do. We also get a commission from photographers when they come in and take your pictures that go in the yearbook and you buy those picture packages. Some of that comes back to the yearbook staff to help us pay for the cost of printing the book. Then of course there's all the fundraisers. We can sell suckers and muffins and cookies and magazines and all of those fun things everybody just loves to sell. But our biggest bulk of our sales and our money must come from advertising, because that's part of the journalism process. There are 3 different kinds of ads that you can be looking at. There are business ads, which is what we generally think of when you talk about selling ads. But we do fairly well selling patron ads, which someone would pay a very small amount of money just to have their name listed as being a patron of our publication. And friends and family ads have become the norm in the last number of years, that mom and dad will buy an ad congratulating their graduating senior, or put in a really embarrassing baby picture of them to try and make a few, and we make a little bit of money off of that. It's lots of fun. When you get ready to approach an advertiser, the process is called dripping. And every time you make contact with an advertiser, it's called a drip. And the more times you drip on an advertiser, the more likely they're going to buy an ad from you. The first drip, or the drips, need to go to the people that are most likely to buy an ad. So anybody who's on staff that has a parent or a relative that runs a business, they're the first place we're going to go to, because they are very familiar with the program and they are generally wanting to support their child's efforts. So they're a really good choice. Previous advertisers are a good choice. Friends that own businesses are a good choice. Then we start branching out to people we don't know quite as well, such as our neighbors, teachers that have businesses in the summertime or outside of the school day, and the people who supply us with the materials that the school uses, the paper suppliers, the food suppliers, the vending machine people, the ones that supply the pop for the concession stand. Those are people that are intimately involved with the school and are more likely to buy an ad from you. The first drip, we're going to send out a letter to those people that we've identified as being potential advertisers, and we're going to say, we're going to be putting out absolutely wonderful publication this year. We really need some help financially in order to do that. And someone is going to be contacting you in the next couple of weeks to see about getting an ad from them. The second drip is when you make your first contact, personal contact, one-on-one with someone. And that's when you make an appointment with the person in charge of advertising. You cannot just walk into McDonald's and ask the kid behind the counter if they want to buy an ad, because the first thing they're going to say is, do you want fries with that? That kid behind the counter doesn't have the power to sign the check. And we want to talk to the person who's actually going to be able to do that for you. That's really a waste of your time. I know that going to McDonald's to get something to eat while you're out selling advertising is a lot of fun, but it's not going to get you the check that you need to have. So you need to make an appointment with the person in charge of advertising. Third drip is when you actually make that visit. Second drip, you've made the phone call, you've made the appointment. Now you're actually going to talk to the person who's going to hopefully write you that check. Now most of those people are going to be of your parents' age, maybe older, and they've got some preconceived notions about what teenagers are all about. And so you want to make sure that you show up on time and that you dress neatly. Not in your holiest jeans and a t-shirt that has something on it that might be misinterpreted by an adult. And be prepared with a copy of your advertising policy and your advertising contract and a pen. And it's really important that you have a pen. Most contracts will not be honored unless they're written in ink. Pencil doesn't count. So if you would happen to run an ad, not get paid for it, and want to go back and talk to someone about getting paid for that ad, if it's not in ink, they're not going to honor that contract, and it wouldn't stand up in a court of law either. The fourth drip is going to be a thank you. A really quick little note saying thank you for your time, even if they don't buy an ad. They have made the appointment, they have talked with you, they have said yes or no, and it's just polite to be able to say thank you very much for your time and for supporting our school. Because that's the way they see it. They don't see it so much as supporting journalism or supporting your publication, they see it as supporting the school. So some reminders. Make sure that you have a policy in place. Make sure you have a budget that you're working with. Be prepared with advertising rates and contracts in hand. And don't make cold calls. Drip on your prospects so that they're prepared for you when you get there. Are there any questions? Sean?
Yes, you said earlier when you were talking about the advertising policy, whether or not you should accept ads from places that sell alcohol. What do you do about a restaurant like Applebee's that sells alcohol but is also a family restaurant?
Since state law varies from one area to the other, you need to check your state law in regards to minors being in an establishment that sells alcohol. And some places those are two completely different areas of the restaurant, and there's not a problem with that, but it's just a conversation you need to have with your administration to see if they're going to permit you to sell ads to those sorts of restaurants. Erica?
Do we accept ads from alternative lifestyle organizations?
Again, that's another conversation that needs to take place. Before the yearbook staff or the newspaper staff accepts an ad that might be questionable, it's a good idea just to sit down and have that conversation with them. Depending on your audience and your community, they'll let you know whether or not that's going to be acceptable. Shannon?
Since online publications don't have a printing cost, do they still need to sell advertisements?
Yes, they do. They need to have the experience that a professional journalist would have to go out and sell those ads, to design those ads, and you might need to buy additional software or hardware in order to upgrade to a website, so you still need income.